How can a country go from having the worst slums in the world to being one of the most prosperous nations on earth in just a span of 30 years? Singapore, along with three other Asian countries, have been growing so fast in the last decades that economists around the world have been taking notice and trying to replicate their success stories. This group of high-growing countries are Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore and South Korea, and together they are known as the Four Asian Tigers. As can be seen with this graph, the growth in per capita GDP in the tiger economies between 1960 and 2014 has been unbelievable. With an average growth rate above 7% per year, they have surpassed countries with a much richer history and impact in the world economy in the 20th century. This video will focus on Singapore's success story and how they managed to become one of the richest countries in the world. So subscribe if you want to know more about the other Asian tigers and even the so-called Asian cubs. There is evidence that suggests that a significant trading settlement existed on the island of Singapore all the way back in the 14th century, right around the time when the Europeans started exploring this part of the world. But for world economy, Singapore wasn't more than just a small fishing village. This all started to change when in 1819, British sailor Sir Thomas Raffles bought a small portion of land in the now south of Malaysia, hoping to open a route into China and impede the expansion of the Dutch in the area. The strategic position of this island and the installation of a free port in the name of the British Empire made Singapore an important trading center which attracted a large number of Chinese immigrants who quickly outnumbered the Malay population present in the region. As a stop on the journey from the Indian to the Pacific Oceans, and on the way to Hong Kong, Japan and Indochina, its commercial importance grew, becoming the world center of the rubber trade. Its importance and status only grew further with the opening of the Suez Canal in 1869 and the naval traffic in the area rising exponentially. Although the future started to appear brighter for the newly arrived people of Singapore, the Japanese invasion in World War II, along with it becoming a British colony and later on having conflicts with the Malay Federation, brought a small nation full of potential to its knees. Only in 1965 was Singapore able to gain full independence and thus becoming a sovereign state. From this point on, Singapore was able to start working on itself and figure out the best way to bring its population out of poverty. You see, back in 1965, right after the independence, 1.3 out of 1.6 million people in the country lived in slums and squatter houses, with no running water, electricity or even sewage systems. Merely 50 years ago, illnesses like tuberculosis, cholera and malaria were common in the States, which isn't surprising when taking into account the living conditions of 80% of the population. Facing severe unemployment and a housing crisis partially caused by the infamous Bukit Ho Swee fire, which destroyed more than 2,800 houses and left around 16,000 people homeless, the government had to intervene to avoid chaos. That's when Singapore embarked on a modernization program beginning in the late 1960s through the 1970s that focused on establishing a manufacturing industry, developing large public house estates, and investing heavily in public education and infrastructure. Within a single generation, the landscape of housing in Singapore was changed. The government provided affordable housing for the majority of the population, going from 9 to 80% of the people now living in public housing, with high modern flats now defining the landscape. To reduce the number of labor strikes, the government introduced more employer rights, and it worked, seeing that today's strikes are extremely rare. But these efforts, although crucial, were just focused on solving internal problems. How would the country boost its economy and reduce poverty among its people? It's simple actually, just play with your strengths. Singapore didn't have natural resources like other countries that could quickly boost its economy, but it had something money can't buy: location. Although this part of the world is full of islands that could easily match Singapore's location advantage, they didn't have a key ingredient: a good relationship with Britain. You see, after Singapore gained independence from the UK in 1965, it didn't follow the tradition of cutting ties with the evil colonizers that once ruled their land. Instead, it saw this as an opportunity to expand their influence and flourish the good relationships it had with the Western world. By being right between Europe and Asia, the country was in a perfect position to control trading between these regions, and that's exactly what it did. Singapore began exporting as fast as it could, as it was the best way to start developing its economy. While South Korea and Taiwan focused on becoming the leaders in manufacturing electronic components and devices, Singapore, together with Hong Kong, focused on becoming the leading international financial centers, attracting banks such as HSBC, Citibank, and DBS Group, which started bringing worldwide attention and introducing higher salaries in the country. Thus, being a financial hub became the competitive advantage that Singapore so desperately needed, and together with industrialization and government intervention, gave rise to the start of the success story we all know today. In the first decade of the industrialization process in the country, the employment fell from 14% to just 4.5%, and by the 1980s, Singapore was a regional manufacturing hub, being the world's biggest producer of hard disk drives at the time. This feat caught the attention of China, which started making regular visits to the country and meetings with the leaders to try and understand how they were growing so fast, so it too could replicate their success, which they eventually did, and so manufacturing in Singapore dropped to 20% of the country's economy throughout the next decades. After the competition from China and other countries in Asia arrived, and with the drastic effects felt in the country due to the 1985 and 1997 Asian financial crisis, the government in the country shifted focus from manufacturing to services. The governors realized that privatizing certain industries would make them more competitive, as well as unload stress from the government duties and overall provide better services to the population. So they privatized industries like telecommunications and loosened up regulation in insurance and financing companies, making them more attractive to foreign investments. Their openness in the internal and external markets in 1985 helped services rise from 24% of the country's GDP to more than 70% today. Multinational companies started flooding into the country and setting up hubs and headquarters, which created a snowball effect that the more companies that set up shop in a district, the more attractive it became to even bigger companies, and so this became one of the main boosters of GDP growth. Now, Singapore is not only listed as the second best place in the world to do business, but also as the fourth richest country in the world by GDP per capita, with the population far bigger than the top three. The government's honesty with its people and their plans for the future has been praised around the globe, and the fact that the nation is also regarded as the safest and one of the best countries to live give the impression that everyone should just pack their bags and move there. But Singapore does have its downsides. For instance, year after year it keeps ranking near the top of the most expensive countries to live in, ahead of famously expensive cities like London, New York and Paris, and for the 5th year in a row, it has been named the world's most expensive city to buy a car. Just to illustrate how insane the car market over there is, let's pick a car popular both in the US and Europe and compare how much it costs in Singapore. For example, the BMW 5 Series, a popular German sedan around the world, has a starting price in the US of roughly $54,000, and the same can be said in the equivalent value in euros in an average European country. But a brand new 5 Series with similar specs and year can cost upwards of $190,000 if you're a resident in Singapore. That's insane. This only contributes to the inequality in the city, because although the average salary of $3,300 doesn't sound that bad, it doesn't represent reality, seeing that the country is packed with 270,000 millionaires, of which 60 have more than $1 billion in wealth, and so the averages get inflated a lot. If you'd like to know about another success story, watch this video of how the Nordic countries became so rich. Hope you enjoyed this video. Leave a like if you liked it, subs if you loved it, and thanks for watching it. Obrigado.